Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. I am your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I am delighted to welcome a very, very celebrated architect from India, Mr. Sanjay Prakash. Sanjay, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me over, Ashutosh.
Thank you. Sanjay is the principal consultant of Shift, which is Studio for Habitat Futures. He is the co-founder of Future Institute, Himalayan Institute for Alternatives, and a senior advisor to the Indian Institute of Human Settlements. His name and work has been mentioned in the 20th edition of one of the main reference works in architectural history, A History of Architecture by Sir Bannister Fletcher. And of course, he has been recognized, felicitated, and awarded several times. Sanjay, what an amazing career you seem to have had so far.
When I look inside myself, I think I'm still the same old me which I was at 10 years old. So I don't think it's a great career. I think I've just been lucky.
It's all your hard work, and I mean, of course, luck always plays a part. But Sanjay, let's talk about the Studio for Habitat Futures, which is Shift. Tell me about your journey as an architect.
I don't know what I can say about my journey as an architect. I do know that partly because of my upbringing and partly because I was fond of mathematics, believe it or not. I was always conscious that we were not doing well by the biosphere, that we were not closing loops, that we were not adding up things to zero. And therefore, we were taking away from the earth more than we were giving back.
Okay.
And maybe it was to do with the fact that my mother used to open the windows in the morning, on summer mornings, and leave them shut on winter mornings. And little things like that inculcated in me a sense of how you need to use buildings in proper ways. So when I evinced an interest in arithmetic and mathematics, I was very conscious that we really need to ensure that everything adds up to zero. I mean, in accounting, for example,
correct,
I had evolved this worksheet in which all the debits and credits used to cancel out, and unless something was entirely zero, I would not accept the account and the balance sheet at the end of the year.
Okay.
So in an Excel sheet, even a 1 paisa loss could mean two differences, which were, millions of rupees, and there was some error somewhere.
Correct.
So we really had to trace everything back to zero. And I think that is what has fueled my interest in environmental architecture, which is what I'm considered now
amazing,
a father of.
Amazing. That's very, very amazing. So, when I was reading about you, you like working with bamboo.
That's right.
And I can understand, probably because it's environmental friendly, but tell me why you have this bias or fascination for bamboo.
Well, I don't have a bias or fascination. But there are two materials which are, which could be used within the environmental ambit. One is earth or dirt or, just excavated stuff. And one is bamboo. Now, bamboo is even more environmental friendly than earth because earth still takes the world, the biosphere, millions of years to form just half an inch or something like that. But especially if you take the secondary earth that is below the topsoil, we are not doing so badly.
Okay.
But with bamboo, it's even better because it's one of the fastest growing plants in the world. And it has a tensile strength of similar to steel. I wouldn't say like steel, but weight for weight, it is 10 times lighter than steel, but it's not 10 times weaker in tension.
I see.
So it's better than 10 times better than intention. So when you talk about beams or ways to frame structures, then it's very important to get good tensile and bending strength, and that bamboo has.
Okay.
We're also discovering interesting properties, such as bamboo. Only today morning I was reading about some Australian university having worked out the ultraviolet shielding properties of bamboo fiber. So they are trying to extract that in Australia and use it for sunscreen lotion.
Amazing.
They also make bamboo beer, which I've had in China.
Okay.
Which is quite nice. And they have a bamboo towel, which is not so satisfying, but they have towels and fabrics made of bamboo because they take out the fiber and they weave it into a cloth. It's not so satisfying only because unlike cotton, it doesn't absorb that well. So to that extent, bamboo has tremendous potential to completely change the way we live in this world. And because it's such a fast growing grass and it can use up all kinds of mucky water, all you need is just some wastewater and bamboo simply grows.
Amazing. And I guess it grows all over our country.
It grows all over our country, especially in Maharashtra and especially in the Northeast. But it can take very mucky soils also. So that way, bamboo is an ideal environmental material. Which is not to say that we should not have its shortcomings also seen. For example, it can catch fire. Like all woods, it catches fire quite easily.
Correct.
And therefore, a lot of research needs to be done to make it fireproof. And in today's world, we have the additional problem of doing this research and adding materials which are themselves benign. It's not so easy to do, but anyway, so that's the work that I'm involved in.
Amazing. So my next question, and I'm going to quote you. It said that you are migrating from practicing architectural design to developing architectural engineering and innovation, especially in the areas of materials, water, waste, and energy resources. Help me understand this, and if possible, give me some examples for each of these different materials.
Yeah, well, because of my interest in mathematics, I think I have tended to view a lot of architecture as a kind of branch of material science or engineering. And to that extent, I know that in a room full of architects, I'm the one who is the most down to earth or the most engineering like. In fact, in certain circles, I've been, should I say, even ribbed to be called कि ये तो PWD का काम करता है, he's like a PWD engineer.
Right.
He's not an architect really. And also I'm learning now that architecture is much more than material science. I always knew it intellectually, but I'm learning that for example, we had a competition recently in which I was the one who was the most difficult about and the most engineering-like about within our team. I was the one who was most engineering-like about whether it can be built or not. And therefore, I had a lot of meltdowns even of within our team of whether we should project this forward or not. And then some of my teammates said, no, we'll do it. This has to be done. And while your concerns are important, they are not what will make or break the project. And funnily enough, I found that they were right and I was wrong about this. And the client was looking for those softer values, which did not have so much weightage for me personally. And therefore, I feel that I'm probably more of an architectural engineer, and I believe architecture is a branch of engineering rather than, which is, by the way, a contention that our Council of Architecture fights against. They say that architecture is not a branch of engineering.
Okay.
We are an aesthetic or a poetic kind of profession. So that is what I frankly rally against, because I really do believe that if you want to design anything in your mind, you need to be able to put it down on the ground. Otherwise, it's not architecture.
Wow. Wow. And what are the kind of work that you're doing with the water, waste, and energy resources?
So, for example, let me take an example with water. So with water, I was working with how low can you go with water and still manage a good life.
Okay.
Now, clearly, the global standard is 135 liters of water per head per day, of which there is a pie chart indicating what goes into what, whether house washing and bathing and so on and so forth. Then you can already, but most Indian cities don't supply that kind of water, that much water. They supply more like 60 to 80 liters per capita a day. And we don't have that endowment of rainfall and the density of population that allows the luxury of 135 liters per capita a day. Because if you are working in environmental architecture, then you have to realize that you don't have the luxury of drawing from the ground. You should not be drawing from the ground, because in any case, much of that water is required by the farming community.
Correct.
So, can you manage with 60? So, my current computations, though I don't have a practical example yet, show that we can, with very extreme recycling, with a strong element of frugality. Now, can you make that saleable proposition? I don't know that yet, but my hunch is that you can.
Right.
Actually, this is like a lot of people are quite proud to be able to say that we are very frugal with water, and look, this is what we do, and we manage to live on 60 liters per capita a day, and instead of 135 or whatever. And they can use that as a boast practically. And if they can use it as a boast, then even if they have the money to take more water and they have the energy to draw it from the ground or whatever, at least they have reached a point in today's world where they are sensitive towards not using what I call fossil water and only using renewable water or from the rain. So, for example, we shifted to Gurgaon some years ago because when we were living in South Delhi in Panchsheel, and we found we could not afford water.
I see.
Every summer, we used to buy a tanker a day.
Wow.
and even then, this water that we drew, I must admit, illegally from the ground, was so bad, so brackish, that I lost my hair.
Okay. I thought it was a more of a fashion statement, but now we know.
No. It is more of a fashion statement, but because at that time the hair that I lost was only little bits, not too much. So, and we couldn't make tea with it because it would just curdle up the milk. So we had to actually buy fresh water in bottles, these 24-liter large bottles. And that was very unaffordable after a while. So much so that when we sold that house and shifted to Gurgaon, the first thing I did was invest in a 1 lakh liter rainwater storage tank, which is always full now. Always, not always full. In the month of May, of course, it depletes before the rain falls. But once the rain comes in, it's full. And at least I know now that if I run short of water, I have 100 days supply down there.
Amazing. So Sanjay, moving on, there's another phrase which picked my interest, which is your no alibis approach. The no alibi approach really seemed very threatening to me because you don't leave any alibis because you don't want anyone to know what you've done. But I'd love to get your perspective.
No. It's the reverse, in fact.
I understand.
The no alibis reverse approach comes in the following way. architects work in collaboration with builders, right? And builders and architects work in collaboration with now what is called a project manager.
Correct.
A person who manages the time and cost and quality and translates the architect's vision into practical reality.
Correct.
It's the intermediate between an architect and the built finished product. So the no alibis approach is that we have within our office inculcated architectural services as well as all project management services. And well, we tried to also do contracting and building, but we found that that's a big game of mafia and therefore we can't manage that.
Correct.
So we gave it up, which actually gives me a lot of respect for contractors because I know what they go through, the kind of hassles that they have to overcome, often on the gray areas of legality. And therefore, they deserve the money that they get. Of course, they make much more money than architects and engineers.
Absolutely. Yes.
And that is fine. But the no alibis approach has to do with the fact that we said that other than contracting, we will do everything. Meaning, we will not be able to say that the drawings were delayed and therefore the project was delayed. And we even anticipate the materials required by the contractor and the men and materials, and then remind him and the client that, oh, this guy is not going to be able to finish in time because he's not going to be able to manage more workers for such and such, for say bar bending or some such activity.
Right.
And therefore, we try to give a service that is complete in itself. So when you come to us, you have come to a place where we will give you that finished building, that dream building of yours, rather than give you some blame game excuses. So this is so extreme that when I was working in China on the Expo, World Expo 2010, we did the Bamboo Dome there. We had a partner who does a lot of 5-star hotels and various stuff like that in Delhi. And he looked at our approach and said, "Yaar, you don't have anybody to blame." I said, "No, we don't have anybody to blame but ourselves."
Right.
Because if things go wrong, we only have ourselves to blame, including things not being done by contractors. Even though we are not contractors, but still, we don't want to reach a point where we just say, oh, this got delayed or that got delayed or that has overrun in cost because such and such didn't behave well. So the idea of no alibis is that we don't really want to give any excuses for not doing the work that a client expects us to do.
Very interesting. So Sanjay, I have time for 2 more questions and I've started to debate what to ask you. But my next question to you is that from an architect perspective, and you already mentioned that it could also be considered as a branch of engineering, though your colleagues and peers may not agree. But where do you get the motivation to keep coming up with such amazing designs that we see across the different skylines across the world?
Should I tell you a secret? Actually, I've reached an age and a place in life where I don't do too much of the ideation myself. This is not something that I'd like a lot of clients to know.
Right.
But still, the fact is that a lot of the youngsters in my office put the pencil to paper first.
True.
And I mean, they know the style of our studio, so they know what not to do and so on. But within that ambit, should we say, they generate ideas. And so my role becomes that of selecting the idea rather than generating the idea.
True. And
it just becomes easier. So to some extent, you could say that I get my motivation from the fact that I don't have to do much. In fact, I'm sailing downhill, as it were, because it's easier and easier to do as I grow older.
Amazing. Well, you can also say that it's the wisdom of so many years of putting pencil to paper then now you are able to look at it and take a decision.
Possibly.
But moving on, I have time for one more question. And this question is relating to technology. Every specialism across our world has been impacted by technology. I'd like to understand from you, how has technology changed or is changing architecture?
So technology is seen in two avatars in architecture.
Correct.
One is the high performance buildings or the high tech kind of stuff, especially the one that comes from industrialized West, such as a lot of glass technology, a lot of glass additives and coatings and steel structures and concrete structures and that kind of stuff. And the second is the even more delicate technology that is required for building in earth, as I have done, and building in bamboo, as I have done. Because these things, you are working with materials that the earth gives you, which means that it's not standardized. It's not industrial in that sense that that steel is, for example. And you can expect a much greater variation. And so the whole act of building becomes an art rather than a science. And both arts and sciences, in my belief, are what constitute technology, in quotation marks, because it is an art and yet it's a technology to be able to cook, for example. And in cooking, you're always conscious of whether something is fresher or less fresh, and therefore it's cutting easily on your knife or not so easily, and so on. And to that extent, technology, to my mind, is a greater razor to use for materials which are environmentally sensitive, such as bamboo and earth, than concretes and steels and glasses, because those materials are in any case standardized and developed by industrial technology, which turns its back towards nature, as it were. So therefore we live in houses so that we don't get the rain.
Correct.
We live in air-conditioned buildings so that we don't feel the heat, and so on. So it's almost like we're turning a lot. So there's one kind of technology turns its back towards nature. The other kind of technology tries to integrate nature, and that is much more difficult to do. But it is also real technology.
Fantastic. Sanjay, on that note, thank you so much. It's been such a privilege speaking to you.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for talking to me about bamboo. I mean, I learned a lot of new things about bamboos, including what is being experimented on in Australia. Thank you for talking to me at such length about how you are working with our Mother Earth and doing your bit to make sure that it doesn't get denuded so fast as a lot of other people are doing. And thank you again for talking to me.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ashutosh.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.